The evening was perfect. Held at the Azure Room, Manhattan's most exclusive private dining establishment, reservations were impossible to secure. The kind of place where your last name mattered more than money ever could. Mitchell Davis, the 22-year-old heir to a $650 million empire, was celebrating with his parents, James and Lillian. But as the vintage Chateauneuf de Pape flowed and candlelight danced across crystal, Mitchell rose from his seat, bottle in hand, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Let me propose a toast," he announced, his voice cutting through the murmured conversations of Manhattan's elite. "A toast to people who know their place." But what came next wasn't a toast. It was a declaration of war. In front of society's finest, he poured an entire bottle of wine on a woman dining alone, a stunning black woman in a red dress who had been reading quietly, bothering no one. His parents erupted in delighted laughter, phones out, capturing every humiliating second. But the real shock? What the woman in the red dress did next. The world knew Mitchell Davis as an untouchable heir who turned cruelty into content for his 1.8 million followers, the privileged son of James and Lillian Davis, the power couple who controlled everything. But they didn't know Kimberly Harris, the woman sitting alone with perfect posture and simple diamond earrings, the woman whose husband controlled the invisible machinery that kept New York running. The woman who would dismantle their empire in 10 weeks using nothing but a phone, a network, and the patience of someone who understood that real power never needs to be loud. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she just smiled with devastating grace, stood up, and walked away. Because Kimberly Harris didn't need to fight, she'd already won. You just watched a privileged brat pour wine on a stranger while his parents laughed and filmed. If that disgusts you, if watching someone humiliate another human being, a black woman, for entertainment makes your blood boil, then prove it. Hit that like button right now. Because scrolling past this without reacting, that's exactly what the other diners at the Azure Room did. They sat there, they watched, they did nothing. Don't be like them. Show me you're different. Like this video if you believe that cruelty, especially cruelty rooted in racism and entitlement, always has consequences. The Porsche was totaled again. Mitchell Davis stood on Fifth Avenue at 1:30 a.m., his phone aimed at the twisted metal that used to be a 911 Turbo S, recording for his 1.8 million followers. "Guys, so this just happened," he laughed, panning across the wreckage, the deployed airbags, the shattered windshield. "Fourth one in 2 years, Dad's gonna kill me." He wasn't worried. Dad never killed him. Dad just wrote checks and made phone calls. The police didn't arrest him. They never did. By the time the tow truck arrived, Mitchell was already in an Uber Black, scrolling through comments. "Spoiled trust fund baby" had 18,000 likes. He screenshotted it, posted it to his story with 4 laughing crying emojis and a crown. The irony was the brand. 14 hours later, he woke up in the Davis family penthouse on Central Park West, 4,800 square feet of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the park, the kind of real estate that appeared in architecture magazines, but never on the market. The housekeeper, Maria, had already prepared breakfast: fresh-pressed juice, poached eggs, artisanal bread from the bakery 3 blocks away that cost $14 a loaf. Mitchell walked past her without acknowledgement, AirPods in, FaceTime in his personal trainer to cancel his session again. "Mr. Mitchell," Maria tried, her voice small and tentative. "Your mother called. She said—" He held up one finger without looking at her, without pausing his conversation, without breaking stride. The universal gesture for "you don't exist right now." Maria's shoulders sagged slightly. She'd worked for the Davis family for 6 years. Mitchell had never once used her actual name to her face. To him, she was furniture that occasionally spoke. By noon, Mitchell was at Davis Holdings headquarters in Midtown, not to work, God no, but to pick up his new corporate credit card after maxing out the previous one on a weekend in Miami. His father's executive assistant, perfectly coiffed and professionally cold, handed it over with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. She knew better than to comment. James Davis had built an empire from his grandfather's real estate portfolio, transforming Davis Holdings into a $650 million juggernaut spanning luxury residential properties, precision manufacturing, and international logistics across 4 continents. 3 generations of calculated risks, strategic acquisitions, and corners cut so smoothly you'd never see the edges. Perfectly legal, mostly. That's what the lawyers were for. That's my boy when James appeared in his corner office, designer sneakers squeaking on Italian marble. Taking what's yours, that's how winners operate. Lillian Davis sat in the chair across from her husband, impeccably dressed in Chanel, every hair in place, every piece of jewelry chosen to signal wealth without vulgarity. She was chair of the Contemporary Arts Foundation, board member of a half-dozen charities, the kind of woman that appeared in the society pages with the same regularity as the seasons. She smiled at her son with pure maternal adoration. Confidence, she told James, her voice warm with approval. He has your confidence. What they called confidence, the rest of the world recognized as cruelty. What they labeled as strength, others identified as pathological entitlement. But the Davis family didn't concern themselves with what others thought. They'd insulated themselves so thoroughly in wealth, privilege, and the right connections that reality couldn't penetrate their bubble. Consequences were for other people. "We're celebrating tonight," James announced, swiveling in his chair to the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Manhattan like a kingdom laid out before a throne. "Your Harvard Business School graduation, your new position as VP of Strategic Development, the Azure Room, 8 o'clock, reservations confirmed." Mitchell was already thinking about the post, the angle, the caption, the lighting. VP before 23, built different. Everything was content. Everyone was an audience, every moment was a performance for followers who would never know his last name, but would envy his life. He had no idea that tonight in that restaurant, he would make the most expensive mistake of his life, that he would humiliate a woman who didn't need to raise her voice to dismantle everything his family had built. That in 10 weeks, this golden empire would be liquidated and sold for scrap, and the Davis name would be synonymous not with power, but with a lesson about what happens when cruelty meets consequence. But right now, at 22 years old, standing in his father's office 60 floors above the city, Mitchell Davis believed he was untouchable, believed his name, his money, his skin color, his gender, all of it made him immune to the rules that governed ordinary people. He was wrong, and the woman in the red dress was about to teach him exactly how wrong. Welcome to Mob Hearts, and I'm so glad you're here. Before we dive into this incredible story, do me a favor, smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on notifications, because what happens next is absolutely shocking. This story has twists you won't see coming. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing from you all. Now, let's get into it. Mitchell's previous DUI had vanished like it never happened. One phone call from his father's attorney to someone who knew someone, and the arrest record simply ceased to exist. No trial, no consequences, not even a slap on the wrist. Just another story for his Instagram, another example of being built different that his 1.8 million followers ate up with algorithmic enthusiasm. Accountability was a concept he understood intellectually, like quantum physics or poverty. Interesting in theory, irrelevant to his actual life. The Davis penthouse on Central Park West was a monument to generational wealth. 4,800 square feet of museum-quality art, furniture that cost more than most people's cars, and views that made visitors stop mid-sentence and stare. Mitchell moved through it like a prince in his castle, barely registering the people who made it function. Maria cleaned, someone else cooked, another person handled laundry. They were invisible infrastructure, human appliances that required no more acknowledgement than the refrigerator. In the lobby, Jorge held the door every single day, greeting Mitchell with professional warmth that was never returned. 5 years. Mitchell had lived in this building for 5 years and had never once asked Jorge's name, never made eye contact long enough to see him as human. Why would he? Jorge was the door guy. That was his entire identity in Mitchell's world. This was the legacy James Davis had built and protected. Third-generation real estate royalty, he'd transformed his father's modest property portfolio into Davis Holdings, a $650 million empire spanning luxury residential developments, precision manufacturing plants in 3 states, and international logistics operations that moved goods across 4 continents. He'd done it through calculated aggression, strategic ruthlessness, and an unwavering belief that the world divided neatly into winners and losers. Winners take what they want, James had told Mitchell 1,000 times since childhood. Losers complain about fairness. Guess which one builds empires? Lillian Davis was the perfect complement to her husband's philosophy, all grace and venom, charity galas and quiet cruelty. As chair of the Contemporary Arts Foundation and fixture on every important board in Manhattan, she'd perfected the art of wielding social power like a scalpel. She smiled while destroying reputations, donated millions while treating service workers like scenery, and raised her son to believe that their family's wealth made them fundamentally different from, fundamentally better than, everyone else. They'd insulated themselves so completely that reality had become theoretical. Bad things happened to other people. Consequences were for the poor, the powerless, the people who didn't have the right last name or the right connections. The Davis family existed in a bubble where money solved every problem and privilege erased every mistake. Tonight's celebration at the Azure Room was supposed to be another perfect evening in an unbroken string of perfect evenings. Mitchell's Harvard Business School graduation, his new title as VP of Strategic Development, his future stretching before him like an infinite runway of success and excess. The Azure Room, where the Davis name still opened doors that money alone couldn't, where reservations were impossible unless you were somebody, and the Davis family was definitely somebody. Mitchell was already planning the content, the ambiance shot with the wine list, the table setup, maybe a subtle flex about the VP title in the caption. Everything was performance. Everyone was audience. His life was a carefully curated highlight reel for people who would never live it but couldn't stop watching it. He had absolutely no idea that tonight he would pour wine on the wrong woman, that his parents would laugh and film while sealing their own destruction, that the elegant black woman in the red dress held more power in her phone's contact list than the Davis family had accumulated in 3 generations, and that in exactly 10 weeks, every single thing they owned, the penthouse, the company, the cars, the art, the illusion of untouchability, would be gone. The clock was about to start. Mitchell just didn't know it yet.
The Azure Room didn't advertise. It didn't need to. The restaurant existed in that rarefied space where wealth alone meant nothing. You needed lineage, whispers, the right surname spoken by the right people. The Davis family had all 3. They arrived at 8 sharp, Lillian in head-to-toe Chanel, James in a bespoke Brioni suit that cost more than a used car, Mitchell in Brunello Cucinelli because ironic streetwear was his personal brand of rebellion against old money aesthetics. Their celebration was loud. Mitchell had his phone out before the menus arrived, filming the wine list, the candlelight, the carefully plated amuse-bouche. Lillian and James toasted him with champagne that cost $400 a bottle. "To my brilliant son," James announced to nearby tables, his voice carrying, "Harvard Business School graduate, VP of Strategic Development at 22. That's how it's done." That's when Mitchell noticed her. Corner table, dining alone. A black woman in a striking red dress, reading a book, wearing simple diamond studs that suggested wealth without screaming it. She looked serene, unbothered, completely absorbed in her reading. "Who let her in here?" Mitchell said, loud enough for his parents to hear, quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. Lillian glanced over, her smile never faltering. Probably someone's +1 who got lost. The racism was casual, reflexive, delivered with the same tone she'd used to comment on the weather. James chuckled, refilling his glass. "Maybe she needs directions to the right restaurant. This isn't exactly—" He left the sentence unfinished, the implication hanging in the air like cigar smoke. Mitchell felt the familiar rush of performance anxiety. That's what it was, really. The need to entertain, to create content, to prove he belonged at the center of attention. He grabbed the newly opened bottle of Chateau Neuf the Pop from the ice bucket. $1,400. Vintage. Irreplaceable. He stood, phone in his other hand, already broadcasting live to his Instagram followers. Guys, watch this. About to help someone understand the dress code. He crossed the dining room with the confidence of someone who'd never faced a real consequence. The woman didn't look up as his shadow fell across her table. Not when he cleared his throat. Not when he spoke. "Excuse me, miss. I think you're in the wrong place. This isn't." He tilted the bottle. The wine poured like blood, a crimson cascade that soaked her hair, her dress, her book, the white tablecloth. $1,400 of vintage French wine, weaponized into humiliation. From their table, James and Lillian erupted in delighted laughter, phones out, capturing every second. Other diners looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, but nobody intervened. Nobody ever intervened when it was the Davis family. Kimberly Harris didn't scream, didn't gasp, didn't react at all for 3 long seconds. She simply closed her book, slowly, carefully, as wine dripped from the pages. First edition Toni Morrison's Beloved, worth $4,000, now ruined. She stood with deliberate grace, wine streaming from her hair down the red silk of her dress, and then she looked at them. Not with anger, not with tears, but with eyes that recorded every detail like a high-definition camera. Mitchell's face, James's laugh, Lillian's phone angle, the precise arrangement of their cruelty. She reached into her small clutch, pulled out 5 $100 bills, more than the meal had cost, and placed them on the wine-soaked table. Then she walked toward the exit, her posture perfect, her heels clicking against marble with the rhythm of a metronome. The staff refused to make eye contact. The sommelier looked physically ill. The maitre d' disappeared into his back office, and through the kitchen's pass-through window, servers could see him on the phone, his hand shaking as he spoke. The Davis family finished their dinner, ordered dessert, laughed about the entertainment. Mitchell posted the video to Instagram before the creme brulee arrived. Caption, "Teaching manners at the Azure Room. #KnowYourPlace." 47,000 likes in 2 hours. Comments flooded in, some defending him, others calling it assault, most just engaging with the spectacle. Mitchell didn't notice the anonymous accounts with no profile pictures, no followers, just single comments. "You have no idea what you just did. That's Kimberly Harris, you idiot. You just destroyed your family." He screenshotted the like count and posted it to his story with crown emojis. Across town, in a penthouse that made the Davis residence look modest, William Harris sat in his study, tablet in hand, watching the video for the 3rd time. His wife sat beside him, still wearing the ruined red dress, wine still drying in her hair. She hadn't changed. She wanted him to see it, to understand what had been done to her, in public, in front of Manhattan's elite, by a child who thought his money made him untouchable. "I'll handle this," Kimberly said, her voice perfectly calm, the tone of someone making a dinner reservation rather than declaring war. William looked at his wife, at the wine staining her skin, at the quiet fury burning behind her composed expression. "How long?" 10 weeks. She stood, walked to the window overlooking the city. "I want them to understand what's happening. I want them to watch every piece fall. I want them to know exactly who did this and why, and I want them to live with it." She turned back to face him, backlit by the Manhattan skyline. "Death is too easy. I'm going to educate them." The clock had started. The Davis family just didn't know it yet.
The email arrived Wednesday morning at 6:47 a.m., time-stamped precisely when James was still on his first coffee. Subject line, "Notice of partnership termination. Anderson Steel Components." James stared at his phone screen, certain it was a mistake. Anderson had been Davis Holdings' primary steel supplier for 15 years, millions in contracts, quarterly golf games with their CEO, Christmas cards with family photos. The body of the email was corporate speak wrapped around a knife. Due to strategic realignment of our supplier partnerships, Anderson Steel Components will be terminating our relationship with Davis Holdings effective immediately. We appreciate the business relationship and wish you success in future endeavors. No warning, no negotiation window, no explanation, just done. James called Anderson's CEO directly. The call went to voicemail. He called again, voicemail. Third time, a secretary picked up with a voice like a recorded message. Mr. Anderson is unavailable. All inquiries should go through our legal department. This is James Davis. We've known each other for. Mr. Anderson is unavailable. Thank you. Click. By Friday, James had found a replacement supplier, more expensive, longer lead times, but functional. Problem solved. Just a weird business hiccup. Companies restructured all the time. It meant nothing. Except it wasn't nothing. The following Tuesday, James's operations VP called with an edge of panic in his voice. We have a situation at Newark. The Shanghai shipment, $3.1 million in precision parts. It's stuck. Stuck. Customs inspection. Port Authority says it's standard protocol, but sir, it's been a week. Every other company's containers are clearing in 24 to 48 hours. Only ours are frozen. James made calls. Port Authority was polite, professional, maddeningly vague. Inspection is ongoing. These things take time. But when pressed about why only Davis Holdings containers were affected, the supervisor's tone cooled. Random selection, sir. That's how the process works. Random, sure. Except the penalty fees were climbing, $75,000 and rising by the day. That same week, Lillian came home from a foundation meeting with her mouth set in a thin, trembling line. Her annual gala, the Contemporary Arts Foundation fundraiser that defined her social calendar, had just lost 4 platinum sponsors, all within 3 days, all with the same rehearsed excuse, redirecting philanthropic resources to other initiatives. But Catherine just committed $200,000 to the Whitney, Lillian said, pacing the penthouse living room, her voice climbing toward hysteria. And Brennan Foundation increased their Met Opera donation. They're not redirecting, they're redirecting away from us. In the Hamptons that weekend, Mitchell posted a photo from the deck of someone's yacht, champagne in hand, sunset perfectly framed. Caption, unbothered and thriving. The likes rolled in, 12,000 in an hour. He didn't notice the anonymous accounts, no profile pictures, no followers, no posts, silently following him, archiving every image, every caption, every careless flex. The hashtag Know Your Place was trending now, the video from the Azure room reshared across platforms with wildly different reactions. Some defended Mitchell's right to call out social climbers. Others called it racist assault, demanded accountability, tagged news outlets. Mitchell found the controversy intoxicating. Engagement was engagement. Attention was currency. Monday morning, James sat in his office with CFO Patricia Chen, a stack of printed emails and reports spread across his desk. 3 separate problems in 2 weeks, different industries, no obvious connection. Run analysis, find the common thread. Patricia worked through lunch. By 3 p.m., she returned with a single page of notes, her face carefully neutral. Anderson Steel's VP of Operations had a meeting last Wednesday with a business consultant. Port Supervisor Rodriguez, same consultant, visited him Thursday. And Margaret Whitmore on the foundation board, she had coffee with the same person Friday morning. What consultant? Patricia's finger moved down the page. Kimberly Harris, Harris Consulting Group. The name meant nothing. James shook his head. Never heard of her. Why would some random consultant? She's not random. Patricia's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. That's the woman Mitchell poured wine on. The temperature in the room plummeted. James stared at the name on the page, at the dates of the meetings, all within 72 hours of the Azure room incident. His hands went cold. Show me everything. Patricia pulled up her tablet. LinkedIn profile, Kimberly Harris, strategic business consultant, Harris Consulting Group. The photo showed the same elegant woman from the restaurant, professional headshot, confident smile. Education, Wharton MBA. Previous roles, McKinsey, Goldman Sachs,
various advisory boards, and married to William Harris. That's where James's breath stopped. William Harris, the name you didn't say out loud unless you had to. "Oh God," James whispered, "what did we do?"
James's phone rang at 5:30 a.m., jarring him from the first decent sleep he'd had in days. The caller ID showed Robert Grayson, CEO of Manhattan Trust Bank, personal line. They'd golfed together for 2 decades. Their kids had gone to the same prep school. This wasn't a business call. This was a courtesy. "James, I'm calling before the official notice hits your inbox." Grayson's voice was tight, apologetic. "The board voted last night. We're recalling your credit facility." James sat up, fully awake now, ice flooding his veins. "The $60 million? Bob, that's not due until 2028. We're current on every..." "Portfolio rebalancing, new risk assessment metrics. James, I fought for you, but..." He paused. 90 days. I'm sorry. 22 years, 2 decades of banking relationship, millions in interest payments, never a single missed obligation. Ended in a 3-minute phone call that felt rehearsed, sanitized, final. "Bob, what the hell is really happening?" Silence. Then, quietly, "Take care of yourself, James." Click. 2 hours later, while James was still trying to process the bank situation, his operations VP called. The Connecticut manufacturing plant, their largest facility, the crown jewel of Davis Holdings' manufacturing division, had been descended upon by the EPA at dawn. Unscheduled environmental compliance review. They'd found, or claimed to find, groundwater contamination levels exceeding federal limits. Production was halted immediately, pending full environmental remediation. "We passed inspection 5 months ago," James said, his voice hollow. "Clean bill, no issues." "I know, sir, but they have new soil samples, new testing methodology. They're very thorough." By noon, the legal team arrived with even worse news. Sarah Chen, the executive assistant from 4 years ago, the harassment case they'd settled for $150,000 and sealed with an ironclad NDA, was back. New lawyer, new allegations. And somehow, someone had recovered emails James's IT department had sworn were permanently deleted. Communications that made him look exactly as predatory as Sarah had always claimed. "How is this possible?" James demanded, his hands shaking as he read the leaked messages on his attorney's tablet. "Someone with significant digital forensics capabilities," his lawyer said carefully, "and someone who convinced Chen to violate her NDA. She must have been offered something substantial, protection maybe, or money we can't match." James hired Sentinel Risk Management that afternoon. Ex-FBI, ex-CIA, the firm that made problems disappear for people who could afford discretion. Unlimited budget, one directive: find out who's destroying us. The report came back in 5 days. 18 pages of connections, all circumstantial, nothing definitive enough for a lawsuit. But one name appeared in every margin, every footnote, every thread that investigators pulled: Kimberly Harris. Steel Supply as board member, consulted with Harris Consulting Group. Port supervisor, sister employed by Harris Logistics subsidiary. Bank CEO, refinanced multiple Harris properties in the past 18 months. EPA inspector, former colleague of an environmental attorney on Harris Group's retainer. Foundation sponsors, all had business dealings with Harris-affiliated companies. The lead investigator, Marcus Webb, sat across from James's desk looking like he'd aged 10 years in 5 days. Former FBI, 2 decades in the field, he'd seen things that would make normal people quit. But when James asked about William Harris, Webb went pale. "Mr. Davis, this is beyond my scope." "What does that mean?" "It means you need to understand what world you stepped into." Webb stood, gathering his files. "I can't help you with this. I won't. My advice, find a way to apologize, publicly, genuinely, and pray it's enough." "Apologize to who? Some consultant?" Webb looked at him with something close to pity. "That consultant is married to a man who controls infrastructure you don't even know exists. Import, export, labor, permits, zoning, every system this city depends on, he has leverage, and you humiliated his wife, in public, in front of society."
After Webb left, James sat alone in his office as afternoon light faded to evening. He pulled up the Azure Room security footage he'd obtained through a favor that had cost him $5,000. Watched his son pour wine on an elegant woman in a red dress. Watched himself laugh, phone out, capturing the moment. Watched Lillian's delighted expression. Watched Kimberly Harris close her book with meticulous care, stand with grace that defied the humiliation, and look at each of them, really look, her eyes moving systematically from face to face, recording, memorizing, cataloging every detail like a camera set to high resolution. He replayed it 3 times. The third time, he noticed what he'd missed before. Her expression wasn't shock or hurt or rage. It was calculation, assessment, the look of someone taking inventory before dismantling a structure piece by piece. Something cold and final settled in James's chest, heavy as a tombstone. They weren't being attacked. They were methodically being erased. And the woman doing it smiled as she walked away because she knew something the Davis family was only beginning to understand. Revenge wasn't about violence or anger. It was about patience, leverage, and knowing exactly which threads to pull to make an entire empire unravel. The clock was ticking, and James had no idea how to stop it.
Sentinel's full report landed on James's desk like a death certificate. 18 pages mapping a spiderweb so intricate it seemed impossible. Anderson Steel's CEO had a brother on the zoning board that approved a Harris construction project worth $200 million. Port Supervisor Rodriguez's sister worked in payroll at Harris Logistics. Bank CEO Grayson had personally refinanced Harris properties totaling $45 million in the past year. The EPA inspector who shut down their plant? Former colleague of an environmental attorney who'd been on Harris Group's retainer for a decade. Every thread, every connection, every person who'd suddenly turned against Davis Holdings, all roads led back to Kimberly and William Harris. Investigator Webb's final advice was delivered standing up, briefcase already in hand, eager to leave. Talk to someone who understands that ecosystem. What ecosystem? The one where official power and unofficial power overlap, where everything's legal until you look too closely, where favors aren't bought, they're owed. He paused at the door. And, Mr. Davis, don't mention my name when you do. It took James 4 days to arrange a meeting. Nobody wanted to talk. Calls went unreturned. Old contacts suddenly couldn't meet. Finally, through a third-party intermediary, Vincent Castellano agreed to coffee. Union rep, political consultant, the kind of man who knew where bodies were buried because he'd helped dig some of the holes. They met at a diner in Red Hook, Brooklyn, far from Manhattan power corridors, far from anyone who'd recognized James Davis. Vincent was already in a booth when James arrived, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Jesus Christ, James. Vincent aged 20 years the moment James said William Harris's name. What did you do? James pulled out his phone, showed him the video. Mitchell pouring wine, Lillian laughing, Kimberly standing with devastating grace, wine dripping from her hair, her red dress ruined. Vincent went pale, actually pale, color draining from his face like someone had opened a tap. He stood up. I can't help you. Vincent, please, just tell me who he is. Vincent sat back down slowly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, glancing toward the door like someone might be listening. William Harris isn't in the business, James. He is the business. Import, export, logistics, labor unions, zoning permits, construction licenses. Every system that makes this city function, he has a piece of it. But it's all legitimate? Legitimate is a spectrum. Vincent's smile was bitter. He owns companies that governments hire, consulting firms that advise on infrastructure, logistics operations that move everything from auto parts to medical supplies. You can't build in this city without touching something he controls. You can't ship anything through our ports without using his people. James felt his throat tighten. How is that possible? Because judges owe him. Councilmen owe him, union bosses, developers, port authorities. They don't owe him favors, James. They owe him everything. Their careers, their positions, their ability to operate.
And Kimberly? Vincent leaned forward. She's not just his wife, she's his strategist, his diplomat. When problems need to be solved quietly, elegantly, without violence, that's her. She's the one who makes phone calls that end careers, that shut down companies, that erase people from the system without a single law being broken. "This is America," James said, hearing how hollow it sounded even as the words left his mouth. Vincent laughed, sharp and humorless. "You think laws protect you? Who do you think writes those laws, James? Who do you think enforces them? Your son poured wine on a queen, and now the kingdom is being taken back, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but a lesson for the next person who thinks money makes them untouchable." He stood, threw cash on the table. "I can't be seen with you. I have a family. I have a career. I'm sorry, but you're on your own." James drove home in silence, Vincent's words echoing in his head. The city looked different now. All those buildings, all those systems he'd taken for granted, suddenly revealed as a machine he didn't control and never had. Lillian was waiting in the penthouse living room, her phone clutched in both hands, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "The Met Gala committee rescinded my invitation," she said, her voice trembling. "They said my presence would be problematic given recent social media events." Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and something in her face broke. "It's Catherine. She's been my friend for 18 years. She read the text aloud, her voice barely steady. "Lillian, someone very powerful made it clear we can't associate with your family. I have a career to protect, a reputation. I'm sorry, but this is goodbye." James sank onto the couch beside his wife. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered with lights that suddenly felt hostile, indifferent, controlled by people whose names they'd never know and whose power they'd fatally underestimated. They knew who was coming for them now, and nobody, not one person in their carefully curated social circle, their business network, their world, would stand with them. They were alone, and the woman in the red dress was just getting started.
The battering ram hit Davis Holdings' glass doors at 6:47 a.m. with the sound of an explosion. James was still in his car in the executive garage when he heard it, metal on glass, shattering, screaming. He ran toward the lobby and stopped cold. Black SUVs blocked every exit. Tactical units and FBI windbreakers swarmed like ants on a carcass. A helicopter circled overhead, the thump of rotors shaking the windows. 60-plus agents moved through the building with the precision of a military operation, carrying out servers, file cabinets, computers, hard drives, everything. His entire company packed into evidence boxes. The warrants were encyclopedic: securities fraud, tax evasion, environmental crimes, RICO predicate acts. CFO Patricia Chen was let out in handcuffs before 8 a.m., her face gray, her perfect composure shattered. VP of Operations was cuffed at his home in Westchester while his children watched through the window. By 11, James sat in a federal interrogation room that smelled like industrial cleaner and fear. Assistant U.S. Attorney Monica Reeves, young, sharp, absolutely certain, laid documents across the table like a poker player revealing a royal flush. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, falsified environmental reports from the Connecticut plant, insider trading communications about real estate deals, $38 million in fraudulent tax shelters spanning 8 years, securities violations involving inflated property valuations that defrauded investors. "Someone provided us with a roadmap, Mr. Davis." Reeves's voice was clinical, almost bored. "Every shell company, every fake invoice, every deleted email we thought was gone forever, recovered and delivered to us with a bow." James stared at his own signatures on documents he barely remembered signing: budget approvals, partnership agreements, joint ventures with companies that turned out to be Harris subsidiaries, legitimate on paper, but designed to make Davis Holdings complicit in operations that existed in legal gray zones. "You weren't framed. You committed these crimes. Someone just made sure we finally looked." The genius was complete. Kimberly Harris hadn't planted evidence. She'd simply removed the people who'd been paid to look away, the accountants who'd structured the shelters, the lawyers who'd crafted the loopholes, the regulators who had accepted the right donations and asked no questions.
She'd exposed what was always there, rotting beneath the surface of 3 generations of legitimate wealth. By 2 p.m., CNBC ran breaking news with James's photo. Davis Holdings raided in massive fraud investigation. The stock opened at $28. By close, it hit $7.50, a 73% collapse. Market capitalization evaporated from $4.2 billion to $890 million in 6 trading hours. Billions of dollars of value just gone. The FBI froze corporate accounts, payroll, operating expenses, everything. Employees couldn't access their funds. Vendors couldn't be paid. The machine that was Davis Holdings ground to a halt. Lillian called from the penthouse, her voice raw from crying. "The building manager just came to the door. They're freezing the assets, James. They're telling me to vacate. They're taking our home." Mitchell stood in the Davis Holdings lobby as media trucks swarmed outside, cameras aimed at the building like artillery. His Instagram video played on loop on every news channel. The wine, the laughter, Kimberly's silent dignity. An anchor's voice. Controversial heir's pattern of entitled behavior now raising questions about whether the family's wealth was built on fraud. James stood at his lawyer's office window that evening, watching Manhattan's skyline as the sun set. The city that had been his kingdom, his birthright, now turned its back with the indifference of a machine that had never cared who operated it. "She didn't destroy us," he said quietly, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. "We revealed we were already criminals. She just removed the people who were protecting us, who we'd paid to protect us." His lawyer said nothing. There was nothing to say. Every crime was real, every document signed, every shortcut taken. Kimberly Harris hadn't framed them. She'd simply made sure that the evidence that had always existed, was finally found by people who couldn't be bought, couldn't be influenced, couldn't be made to look away. The Davis empire hadn't been destroyed. It had been exposed as hollow, and now it was collapsing under the weight of its own corruption.
Monday morning, Greystone Properties, Davis Holdings' anchor tenant, $180 million in annual lease revenue, sent a 2-paragraph termination notice. Fiduciary duty to our shareholders requires distance from entities under federal investigation. We will not be renewing upon expiration. 20 years of occupancy, gone. No negotiation, no appeal. Tuesday brought the board resignations. 5 directors quit via email within 3 hours of each other. 2 sentences each, no explanation, no apology. Gerald Morrison, James's college roommate, the man who'd been best man at his wedding, sent the shortest. "Effective immediately, I resign from the Davis Holdings Board of Directors. Best of luck." 26 years of friendship reduced to corporate boilerplate. The stock hit $4.20. The company was now worth less than its Manhattan real estate holdings. It wasn't a business anymore. It was a carcass being picked clean. Wednesday, the white shoe law firm Hartman and Price, the firm that had represented Davis Holdings for 3 generations, withdrew. A conflict of interest has emerged. We can no longer provide representation. The conflict, James learned through back channels, was simple. They also represented 3 Harris Group subsidiaries. Choose the Davis family or keep the Harris business. It wasn't even a choice. James tried to mortgage the Hamptons estate, $22 million of waterfront property that had been in the family since his grandfather. The title company delivered the news with professional sympathy. 4 contractor liens had been filed in the past week, plus a wetlands violation notice from the county. All legitimate claims, all perfectly timed. Obstacles that would take 6 months minimum to clear. By then, it wouldn't matter. Lillian went to her hair salon Wednesday afternoon, desperate for normalcy, for the routine that had anchored her life for 2 decades. Karen Whitney was already in a chair when Lillian walked in. Their eyes met in the mirror. Karen stood up mid-cut, grabbed her purse, and walked out without a word. 18 years of friendship, lunches, galas, family vacations together, ended in 30 seconds of silence. Mitchell finally deleted his Instagram that night. The hate mail had become unbearable. Thousands of messages calling him racist, entitled, evil. Death threats, doxing attempts. Brands he'd had sponsorship deals with publicly cutting ties.
He sat on his bed, finger hovering over the delete button, watching his follower count, 1.8 million. Then he pressed it. The account vanished, 1.8 million to zero, erased like he'd never existed. He walked to his father's study, where James sat staring at legal documents he could no longer afford to fight. "Dad," Mitchell whispered, his voice cracking, "I'm so sorry." James looked at his son, really looked at him, seeing past the entitlement to the terrified child beneath. He was too exhausted to be angry anymore. Anger required energy they didn't have. "I know, son. I know." An empire that had taken 80 years to build, 3 generations of ruthless ambition, strategic acquisitions, calculated risks, collapsed in 72 hours. All because they couldn't see that the woman in the red dress, the woman they'd dismissed, humiliated, treated as invisible, held more power in her network, her relationships, her quiet influence than the Davis family had accumulated in 3 generations of loud, obvious wealth. Money wasn't power. Connection was power, and they'd just learned the difference. The plea agreement was signed in April at the Southern District of New York in a conference room that smelled like old coffee and institutional defeat. James Davis accepted 18 months in minimum security federal prison and complete asset forfeiture in exchange for avoiding trial. The allocution was public, standing before a judge, admitting to tax fraud and securities violations while cameras recorded every word. Davis Holdings was dissolved like it had never existed. Real estate portfolio sold to an international REIT, manufacturing division absorbed by a competitor. 3 generations erased in an afternoon of signatures. May brought the Sotheby's auction. Lillian insisted on attending against their lawyer's advice. They sat in the back row and watched strangers bid on their lives with the detached efficiency of people buying furniture. Lot 156, custom Italian dining table, the one where they'd hosted governors and CEOs, estimated at $65,000, sold for $28,000. Lot 203, Lillian's engagement ring, 4-carat Tiffany diamond that James had saved for months to buy 30 years ago, estimated at $180,000, sold for $89,000. Lillian made a sound, small, wounded, like something breaking deep inside her chest. Lot 287, Mitchell's childhood Steinway piano, the one Lillian had insisted he learn on, the one that sat in the penthouse gathering dust after he quit lessons at age 12, worth $120,000, sold for $31,000. Lot 319, James's first edition book collection, his grandfather's books, his father's books, his books, signed Hemingway, rare Fitzgerald, Faulkner first editions, sold as a single lot for $12,000. 3 generations of literary heritage bought by a dealer who'd flipped them individually for triple the price. Mitchell watched a man in a Yankees cap win the Basquiat that had hung in the penthouse living room, the painting he'd walked past every day without really seeing. Listed at $240,000, sold for $97,000. "Everything's worth less when you're forced to sell," James whispered, his voice hollow. July brought the move to Astoria, Queens. 2-bedroom apartment, 850 square feet, 3rd floor, street-facing, no doorman, no elevator, no marble, no views. The kitchen was so small Lillian couldn't open the oven and refrigerator simultaneously. Mitchell took the couch without complaint, just lay there staring at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the neighbors' music thump through walls thin as paper. James found work through a former colleague, one of maybe 3 people who still returned his calls. Business consultant for second-tier firms, $42,000 a year. He wore Joe's A. Bank suits bought on sale and took the subway to offices in buildings without lobbies, without security desks, without the trappings of the world he used to inhabit. Lillian lasted 6 weeks of unemployment before desperation forced her into the job market. Paralegal assistant at a boutique law firm in Midtown. $38,000 a year, answering phones, filing documents, making coffee for attorneys younger than Mitchell. Former socialite friends came in for meetings sometimes, walked right past her desk and didn't make eye contact. She'd become invisible, the very thing she'd accused Kimberly Harris of being. Mitchell found work at a fintech startup. Customer service representative, 45,000 base, handling complaint calls 8 hours a day from people angry about fees, about technical issues, about things that weren't Mitchell's fault but became his problem. His manager was 24, 2 years younger, running a team of 15 with competence Mitchell had never needed to develop. The training included modules on de-escalating angry customers and maintaining professional composure under verbal abuse. He thought about the wine every single day, the laughter, the video, the woman's face as red liquid dripped from her hair. Tiny living room at night, Chinese takeout eaten from containers because they didn't have enough plates yet, used IKEA furniture assembled wrong because James had never assembled anything in his life, neighbors' music vibrating through walls at 2 a.m. This was their life now. And somewhere in Manhattan, in offices with views they'd never see again, Kimberly Harris had already moved on to protecting other interests, managing other threats, wielding power they'd never understood existed. The Davis family wasn't worth remembering. They were just another cautionary tale, another lesson about what happens when people who've never faced consequences finally meet someone who understands that real power doesn't need to shout. It just needs to wait.
The email arrived on a gray Tuesday in March, 10 months after everything collapsed. Subject line, interview opportunity, Harris Consulting Group. Mitchell stared at his phone screen, finger hovering over delete. It had to be a cruel joke, some internet troll who'd found his email, weaponizing his humiliation one more time. But he opened it anyway. Senior account manager position, salary $95,000. Real money, life-changing money, a chance to rebuild something from the ashes. Meeting location, the Azure Room. Mitchell's stomach dropped. He hadn't been back since that night, hadn't been able to afford it, hadn't been invited, hadn't dared to show his face in a place where everyone had watched him destroy his family for Instagram likes. He took 2 trains and a bus, couldn't afford Uber anymore, and arrived in a $200 suit from Macy's that fit poorly across the shoulders. He walked through those doors a different person, gaunt, humbled, carrying the visible weight of what he'd destroyed. The maitre d' glanced at him with polite professional indifference. No recognition. Why would there be? The confident air in designer clothes was gone. This was just another job applicant, unremarkable and forgettable. Mitchell scanned the dining room for whoever was interviewing him. Then he saw the corner table, the same table, and sitting there in an elegant navy dress, reading a book, a glass of wine beside her, Kimberly Harris. Their eyes met across the room. She closed her book with deliberate care and gestured to the empty chair. "Please, sit." Mitchell's hands shook as he crossed the dining room. Every step felt like walking toward judgment. "Mrs. Harris, Sit down, Mr. Davis." Her voice was calm, controlled, carrying the same quiet authority it had held that night when wine had dripped from her hair. He sat. She studied him with those same eyes that had memorized his face 10 months ago, cataloging, assessing, seeing everything he'd tried to hide. "You look different," she observed. "Humbler." "I am," his voice cracked. I'm so deeply sorry for what I did, for what my family." She raised one hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "I didn't ask for an apology. I asked you here for an education." She signaled the sommelier, who approached with visible nervousness. Kimberly ordered without looking at the menu. The 2019 Chateau Neuf du Pape, the same vintage from last May. Mitchell's throat closed. $1,400. The same wine, the same bottle he'd poured over her head while his parents laughed and filmed him. The sommelier returned, presented the bottle with shaking hands, and left it on the table. Kimberly opened it herself, the cork releasing with a whisper. She poured 2 glasses with the precision of someone performing a ritual. "Do you remember this wine?" she asked. "Every day," Mitchell whispered. "Good. Most people pour wine on someone and never think about it again." She slid one glass across the white tablecloth toward him. "Your family thought I was nobody, a black woman dining alone, therefore out of place, therefore fair game. You didn't see a person,
You saw a target for your entertainment. Mitchell couldn't meet her eyes. Why didn't you destroy us immediately? You could have had us killed, or... Kimberly smiled, cold but not cruel. Because destruction is easy, Mr. Davis. Any thug can burn something down. I wanted you to understand how you fell, to watch every support system vanish one by one, to realize that the people you thought were beneath you, the suppliers, the port workers, the regulators, held all the real power. She took a sip of wine, savoring it. Your father built his empire on arrogance and fraud. I didn't destroy it. I revealed it was always rotting from within. I simply removed the people who were being paid to look away. Every supplier you lost, every bank that called your loans, every regulator who finally did their job, they didn't do it because you earned their loyalty. You bought their silence. But silence isn't loyalty, and when someone offers them a choice, protect the Davis family or protect their own interests, you never stood a chance. Mitchell's voice was barely audible. You could have just told us to apologize. Would you have? Kimberly leaned forward slightly. Would your father have meant it? Would your mother have stopped laughing? Silence. They both knew the answer. My husband wanted me to handle this his way, quietly, permanently. She paused, letting the implications settle. I chose differently. I wanted you to live, Mr. Davis, to carry this, to understand that every person you dismissed, every woman you underestimated, every blackface you assumed didn't belong, they all have power you couldn't see. That power doesn't come from money or status. It comes from relationships, respect, and remembering that everyone you meet is someone's wife, someone's husband, someone's mother. You treated me like I was nobody. She stood, leaving the bottle on the table. So I showed you what nobody can do. The job offer is real, by the way, if you want it. $65,000 to start, not $95. I lied to get you here. You'll work in accounts receivable, reporting to a woman half your age who grew up in the Bronx. She picked up her clutch, her book. Whether you take it, whether you learn anything from these 10 months, whether you become better than your father, that's up to you, but you'll never forget the woman in the red dress. She walked toward the exit, following the same path as that night. This time, Mitchell watched with understanding. The maitre d' held the door for her with deep, genuine respect. She wasn't invisible. She never had been. Mitchell sat alone with the wine, finally seeing clearly. The woman they'd humiliated held all the power. They just couldn't see it, because they'd been taught not to look.
Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button one last time. Let's get this video to 20,000 views. We can do it together. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I have more stories coming that are just as powerful, just as emotional, and just as unforgettable. Comment below what your favorite moment was from this entire story. I'll see you in the next story. Take care, and remember, be nice to people because you may not know who they are.